Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about the Double Exposure series. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And on this week's episode, we're talking about the Double Exposure series at the cinema. And if you've never heard of this series, Jason, it's so cool because they take student-produced films at Indiana University, and then they pair those with student scores. Yeah. And the scores are written for the films, and they perform them live, orchestra style, at the cinema.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yes, very cool. Went to the one last year, very excited about it. So this year, we actually have someone on the show to talk about it. So from the music school, we have John Gibson.
Hello.
And from Communication and Culture, we have Suzanne Schwibs.
Hello.
So thank you guys very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we will talk extensively about this series because I've got lots and lots of questions about it. All right. So let's talk about the Double Exposure series. March 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Let's run through this again. What is the Double Exposure series? You've got student film, short student films paired with student composers, and we play it with a live orchestra in front of people at the cinema.
Student conductors, student ensembles.
Yes.
There's actually two ensembles. There are two halves because it's a lot of music.
Yeah.
And so they're divided up in two halves, and it's all students.
Yeah.
All the creative work is done by students. Plus, this is a new addition this year because we have some films that have some sound effects and dialogue. The students from the audio technology program are also involved.
Interesting.
So they're preparing the
Are they going to do like
soundtracks.
live Foley and stuff like that?
No.
We're not going to take it there, but
Maybe that'll be in the future.
We'll do like a Prairie Home Companion thing. We'll have a guy off the side.
but they're really doing a lot to kind of improve the sound of these components of the films.
Yeah. All right, so let's briefly discuss each of your roles because, John, you're from the music school. Suzanne, you're from CMCL. So how did this all come together? How did you two get involved with this? So maybe you could just explain your role at the music school and how all this came together.
I'll just tell you how it started. I'm not entirely sure how it started because I was brought in a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I think it was cooked up by John Vickers of the cinema and Dean Gwen Richards of the School of Music and the chair of my department, David Zubay. And very quickly they brought Suzanne in because, of course, she's working with the students who could make these films. And I kind of signed on as really a sort of advisor to the students. You know, I'm not trying to get in their way. They're driving it. But I'm just sort of the faculty sponsor, really, of the student composers who are working on this. And we have a very active Student Composer Association, which is made up of graduate students. So there's one of them, Nick Klein, who's been working with us very intensively to put this together.
Nick has been on the show before. We had him on when they did the David Copperfield event.
Right. And I should say about that David Copperfield event, that was happening a little bit before these plans were being developed for this double exposure. That and also, I guess it was the Metropolis, having the live orchestra
So
for that.
There's a number of collaborations between the cinema and the School of Music.
Was that helpful to have that sort of already done?
As a precedent, I think, yes. Those were larger groups of musicians and, bigger projects in some
Double
ways.
exposure has its own challenges.
Definitely. I mean, we don't have one work. We have 10 works,
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Rapid fire.
often there are several students involved in the filmmaking of it, and then they have to coordinate with the composers. And
So that is something I want to talk about. How much, you definitely could do this as student makes a film and then hands it off to the composer, and then the composer figures out what to do. Are they sort of paired up early on to like collaborate the whole process?
Yes, they are. We call it the speed dating session. So early in the semester. It's usually done in the context of a class I teach in the fall, which often is an experimental cinema class where the students actually do like silent film, and they actually use 16 millimeter film or Super 8 film, although they can also use more modern technologies. So there is one session early on, like early October or so, where we bring all of the students that are interested, and they don't all have to be in that class. And then all of the music students that are interested, the that are members of the Composers Association together, and then they'll go round robin, and everybody talks to each other for about a minute, just talking about the kind of films they like and the films that they plan to make, and then they all get to vote who they would like to work with, and then it happens pretty quickly and pretty easily. Actually, they get matched up. Then there's a certain period where the film students sort of work on their own. I mean, it's not like they're constantly, and it depends on the team too. Some people just want to make their film, and then the composer afterwards comes in when it's pretty much a solid cut.
I think that depends also on the kind of film that it is. We have some this time that are narrative films with dialogue, and those seems like they kind of have to be developed first before the music comes in, so that's a little bit more like the traditional model. But then we also have some films that are silent or more experimental in some way, and those can be a collaboration that happens a little bit earlier on. In fact, I think last year we had one where the music was written first, and then the
I do remember
video
that
was
one.
developed for that. I don't know that we have that this time,
a
but
dialogue,
yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because you were talking so much earlier about 3D, because some of the films hark back all the way to the beginnings of film history. Sorry, I bumped the microphone.
That's okay.
So some of these films hark back all the way to the beginnings of film history, which not only in the sense that in the old days you would have a live orchestra often, or a performer, maybe a pianist who would play live to the music as it was shown to the audience, but also in the sense that there's at least one project in there where they use the techniques of they shot some film, and then they actually make a cameraless film where they just lay things on the film itself and then expose it to light. So there's a lot of experimental stuff like that. And so it goes back to the beginning of the history of the film, where you have silent films, like a black and white film, with no sound, no sync sound whatsoever. And then in those cases, you often have more of a dialogue where the student will show it to the composer. The composer says, I can do this, I can do that.
Yeah.
It goes back and forth.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about the music program, because IU is it has basically the number one film music school in the country. I mean, I don't know if there's like a rival that it sort of goes back and forth, or if we're generally considered the number one film school.
Yes, we're number one.
We're number one. So
just leave it at that.
when you have a music school that's that high level, is there a lot of sort of people in the music school who like, I want to do film music, or is it something that maybe the cinema has increased that interest in film music?
It's interesting because traditionally we have not done that. I mean, we have composition faculty with 8 members and writing music of different kinds, but never film music. Unlike USC, for example, is a program where there's a lot of film composition. But we do see incoming students who really would like to do this. And I notice particularly undergraduates come in, and they've seen a lot of movies, and they're really interested in the scores that they're hearing. And they really would like to jump at the chance to do something like this, where they have some actual experience going through the process. And so that's some of the people we're getting for that. One other great thing about doing it in the context of this music school is that all the performers are terrific. You just can't go wrong. Last night we had our first rehearsal, and they're sight reading this music, some of which is rather difficult and kind of experimental. And, it's not that they're ready to present it to other people, but it's surprisingly together for, just a first short effort.
Yeah.
I would second that. It's really exciting, and I always encourage my students then to also go and watch the rehearsals, because a lot of film students haven't seen musicians work, and it's really good for them to see how detailed they are and how specific and how they're trying to interpret it. And it's even more interesting because tonight we're actually going to have the first rehearsal where they're trying to play it to the films.
Oh, wow.
That's a whole other set
it's
of
just
problems.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And yes, the fact that the School of Music here is of that high caliber is really makes the difference.
Yeah.
Because if nothing else, people will hear a really good performance of the music. And to see it together with the films it's a really
I mean, I remember
experience.
talking last year to Nick and I forget the composer's name.
Ryan? Or
Of the David Copperfield event.
Ari.
yeah.
Ari,
Ari
that's
Fleischer.
right. That's what I thought his name was. I remember talking to them last year, and Nick said, "Oh yeah, we had our first rehearsal like last week, and it was like 2 weeks to the event." And I was like, "That sounds insane. These are student musicians." But But no, it's like these are essentially, for all intents and purposes, professional quality musicians. They just haven't quite had all the experience yet, as far as, the talent behind this. They're actually really, really good, and they can just sort of do that, The next question I had was about the conductors. So conductor composers. So who's actually sort of picking the team, I guess I would say, of musicians? Is it all the same musicians for every film, or does the conductor get to say, no, I want this person or that person?
Well, first of all, the conductors are not the composers in this case, and partly because of the way things are set up in the cinema and the fact that it's a live performance. We have two halves of the program, and we decided to have two separate ensembles with separate conductors for each half. But it means that one ensemble and conductor will take care of the 5 films that are on a particular half. So those conductors are getting scores from the composers and having to interpret them and make it work with the films that they've just gotten to, So it's actually really a lot depends on the skill of these conductors, and they're really quick and able to kind of marshal these forces and get it working really nicely.
Yeah.
There's a lot that they have to contribute to it.
Yeah.
It's very nice to watch the rehearsals because
Yeah.
they'll be working on it, and the conductor will be speaking with the musicians, and then there'll be this little consulting session where the conductor and the composer they talk, and then the composer and the film student talk, and it really is very collaborative.
Yeah. So Suzanne, I'm wondering about the film students from this side. I know. I recognized a few of the names from last year to this year doing it. How do you sort of? You said it was sort of based off of a class. Do you invite people? Do people come to you and say, "I'd really like to be involved in this"? How do you choose which students get to participate in this?
Well, actually, a lot of it is self-selected. We use the class as a sort of basis partly because most of the time it's an experimental class, and so it lends itself, and they make short films rather than the sort of longer film. But then I usually send an email out to all my AIs because we do have the introductory film class where they do 16mm film and some other classes as well. And so it is open. And if they can join that speed dating session, then they can certainly participate. And then it's a matter of how they match up.
Yeah.
And it is a little bit difficult because once a class is over, the project isn't over. So the students have to be willing to put in a little bit of extra time, and they're already working in the spring semester on other classes. So
I guess
I haven't really had to select very carefully.
Yeah.
What did happen, though, at the end of the semester, because this past fall, the class that we had was not the experimental class. It was the intermediate film production class where they learn how to do double system sound. So it's actually sound film. That's why there's more dialogue in it. And some of the films just were too long. So at the end of the semester, I think it was beginning of December, we had a big session with the composers and the sound faculty and the music faculty and us and the students, and we looked at all of the films, and then there was a conversation, well, can I even, write a score to this?
Yeah.
So some of the films were just too long.
Sure.
And so if the students couldn't cut them down, then we tried to find alternatives.
Yeah. The other thing I was wondering about is, are you seeing, students have this opportunity, which I imagine is not a common opportunity unless you're going to something like USC or NYU to have like a real score composed and get to work with a real composer and work with musicians of this caliber at a student level. Are students sort of getting out of this and like trying to sort of what are they learning out of this about what they can do? Are they sort of trying to make more score-friendly films, and are they actually going out and approaching those musicians again on their own?
Yes, they do, actually. There have been a couple of students, I think Sahar is one of them, who went straight back. So then they took another class in the spring, and they went straight back and asked Ezra if he would score that one too.
Yeah.
So they do actually make friendships in that class, and they continue collaborating. And I think it actually sort of expands the horizon because it's not that film students haven't gone or any of the production students at IU haven't gone to friends and that are in bands and stuff, but they don't typically have close connections to classical musicians. And so I think it really sort of expands their horizon to see
Exactly.
what's possible. And I remember that some of the students would even say like, oh, I don't know, I was kind of imagining an electronic soundtrack. And I said, well, you have no idea what they can actually do with the instruments. And I know I was listening yesterday to one of the pieces. I think it's the horror film, and the person was making all these weird sounds on the harp, where she sort of runs her fingernails right up and down the harp. And those are things that I think commonly people don't know about, that you can actually make this really experimental sounds with classical instruments. So I think, it sort of opens your ears.
Yeah.
And I bet that's probably fun for the musicians too, because that's usually stuff that you probably shouldn't be doing with the instruments, or at least or warming them up, So they're probably getting a pretty big thrill out of it.
Last night there was one score that required the cellist to tune her lowest string down a little bit, and she's kind of going, but it made a great sound. So.
Yeah. That's excellent. So let's talk about some of these films. I see we've got a list here.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you've seen all these films. I don't know if we want to talk about every single one individually, but maybe we can just sort of chat about a few and maybe mention some names so people sort of get a sense of what they're going to see. Like, is there, I know last year I saw there was a few experimental films. There was a really good horror film that was in there that Sahar did that I thought was really creepy and effective. Is there sort of like a theme? Are you seeing more of a type of film that you didn't see last year or anything like that?
No, I think they pretty much run the gamut of things again. There's the very first one, the Overture, is another really experimental one. That's the one that's sort of cameraless, where it's Javier Ramirez's, and Nick Klein is actually doing the score to that one. And he went into the dark room with strips of... Actually, he filmed his little daughter, who was just born last August. And so he's filmed her over the past few months, and then he took the film strips and he laid them on top of other films. So it's like a little homage to his first child as well.
That's cool.
And so there's that one. That's truly experimental. Then there's a film that's, I guess you could call the storyline kind of experimental, and that's a black and white film. We do have horror films. There is Escaping Death by Mitchell Parks, which is very much in that vein, about this man who was, I guess, escaping death is kind of a play on words. So I can't say too much about it. But he sort of comes face to face with either something that happened or is in his imagination.
Okay.
A very common student trope, actually.
Yeah.
Student film trope. And then there's Cyrus, which is about this sort of schizophrenic.
We talked about Cyrus after we talked about the Iris Film Festival. I loved Cyrus. Cyrus was my favorite film.
It did win in the Iris something, right?
I think it was
audience favorite.
Maybe audience award.
Yeah.
I voted for it for audience award for sure. I thought it was brilliant. I can't wait to see that one again.
So it'll be interesting to see what you think when it's paired with this live music. How that changes.
Because it had sort of like a temp track. I mean, that's something I hear from students a lot. It's like,
they put a temp track.
They throw it up there and like, I'm not legally allowed to use this music, but for today it's okay. If I since it's at the film festivals, I got to find something real.
Right.
So it'll be nice. So let's pause this for a second and talk about what happens to these films and scores after this event. Is there gonna be a recording of this? Are you gonna go to a studio and record it?
Yes, actually, it will be recorded this weekend.
That's one of the nice things that's happening when we bring in the audio students and faculty, because they're going to professionally record these scores actually before the screening.
Nice.
And then the audio students will be able to kind of remix them and fit the dialogue and effects in and do all of that.
We'll make a DVD of it.
Yeah.
There actually will be a DVD that's called Double Exposure, and it'll have all the films on it mixed just right.
Right, so that'll be done after the screening.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. I do see Grief Stricken on that list, which is one that I liked.
You talked to Russell McGee not too long ago.
Russell was on the show. We talked about that film. I liked a lot of it. I wish it kind of would have gone on longer, but I understand. I'll be interested to see what kind of score, because it's kind of it changes.
It has a surprising ending.
I know.
Yeah.
It does have a surprise
it'll be
ending. And
interesting
I
to
was actually,
see-
well, I heard the temp score. I heard the MIDI version that Ryan wrote to it, and I was thinking, I wonder how he's going to make that turn, and it's very good.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, a silent film.
Yes.
So the music is really
Yeah, and it has some
Providing a
excellent
lot.
cinematography in that one as well. Some really great shots in that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And it's shot in black and white, and it really is supposed to be like an old silent movie.
Yeah.
In the acting and the costuming and
Yeah.
just the way the story is, and
Yeah.
it's a beautiful little piece.
Yeah.
I don't know what else do we have. Oh, we have a little time lapse project as well, and that was shot not on film. That was shot on a digital SLR camera, as were the last two films, Picnic in Black Meadow and Red Balloon.
And we have this one, Trip to the Park, which is a longer film that is more narrative than some of the others, having dialogue. And that's one that's a little more traditional in the sense that the music is providing cues. So there'll be a little musical interlude while they're doing this montage
Yeah.
sequence, and then some silence. So it's
Okay.
a chance for that composer, Ian Clark, to have an experience that's more like
Yeah.
what you would have with a Hollywood film or
Yeah.
something.
So let me ask you about the composers. Like what what kind of I always think of the music school, I guess, as sort of like a performance-based school, but it seems like there's also a very heavy like composition section to the school. Like what sort of percentage would you say is composition students versus performance
I'm
students?
not sure I know the exact figures,
Yeah.
but there are approximately 50 composition students at all three levels: undergraduate, master's, and doctoral. And I mean, the school, I think there are about 1,500 students.
Yeah.
The majority of them are performers, but of course there are also scholars, musicologists, and theorists.
Yeah.
So a lot of different kinds of people. The composers, if they come there as an undergraduate, they have admission, they get admission to the school as composers. It's not like they go there and try different things and figure out, oh, yes, I'm going to be a composer. They already
Yeah.
have those skills before they even come. And so that's why we're able to have a number of freshmen in this project.
Yeah.
They're able to write music. And
Yeah, because Ari last
good
year
level.
was a freshman or sophomore, something like that.
Yes,
Wasn't
yeah, he was pretty early.
Yeah.
That's right. But that's an example of somebody who was really wanting to do this before he came and
Yeah.
had some experience doing it.
Yeah.
But it is a very performance-oriented school, so these composers have performing experience themselves and are very attuned to the challenges that the musicians performing their work have.
Yeah. Anything else, Jason?
My only question is, you did mention sort of the fact that a lot of these students are working on the project sort of after the fact. So obviously they're getting some credit for working in the class originally, but then how does that sort of work for these other students, the music students?
Well, the music students don't get any credit for this.
It's just the experience then.
They do this outside of their composition lessons and everything else they're doing and it's part of their
So it's just
curriculum.
it's just a cherry on
they
top.
consult with their teachers on
Sure.
these scores, but it's just something else they're doing on top of it. They have a number of projects like that, the Hammer and Nail dance composer collaboration, so they're used to doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, the film students, they put in quite a bit of extra work as well because oftentimes at the end of the semester, then there might be some scenes that they could improve. And so then they can go out and shoot some more and they'll
Yeah.
do that. And I usually try to facilitate the cost. Because film, if they shoot on film and it has to be transferred to HD, that's pretty pricey. And so I usually tell them, if you need to make it better or if you need to reshoot something, I'll subsidize it. And so our department actually sort of subsidizes them going out and doing some more. And so that, is kind of gravy on top of it. So they don't get credit for that anymore.
Right. Yeah, they're doing a lot of work actually
But
after
they do get
the
a lot
semester
out of
is
it.
over.
So
Sure.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a
Well, yeah.
curricular experience.
You can put, hey, this is the thing on my reel that I had it,
yeah.
professional composed music, semi-professionally composed music
I
on
think
it.
it's-
That's definitely worth it. I know. I hear that from professors all the time. Like, what can they put on their reel?
Yeah, just to have participated like that and to have had that experience of working with a musician and, just sharing the ideas and having that dialogue. It's just really great. And then the event itself.
Yeah,
is
that's
just
what I was
so-
going to
Oh,
mention.
yeah.
there's nothing is quite like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I go to the student film events all the time, and it's nice. Like the students come and they're sort of there. Maybe it's close enough to a break that their parents are there or something, or they can go with their friends, or maybe it's the Iris and they win an award. But there's nothing like the sound at the cinema and seeing a thing you created that other people have contributed that much to, and sort of seeing it all come together. I have to imagine.
Well, and then openly inviting the public to come watch it.
Exactly.
I think that's probably a
Right.
big deal too.
Yeah, and last year we actually had visitors from other parts of the state. They had seen it on the IU website and said, "Oh, we didn't know there's a film school down here." And
Yeah.
they called me up and I said, "Well, come down and watch this event." And they came, and they were really thrilled to be a part of it. And the cinema was sold out, so it was this
Yes.
grand thing. Like, oh,
Yeah, anytime there's live music at the cinema, I'm going to be there regardless, because it's always a
Yeah.
special experience. And when it's a full orchestra, doubly so, that's when you start canceling other things to be at the cinema that day. So
Yeah, I think what's really special too is because the music is performed live, and because most of the time when you see a film or you see it on a DVD, it's all together and you just kind of take it for granted. But when you actually see the musicians play to the screen and the conductors there and the students who've made the films, it's just it just kicks it up a notch.
Exactly.
It's just there's just nothing quite like it, and so it's a completely different experience, and it's a really, I think for the students, it's sort of a peak experience to be able to do that. They won't forget that.
exactly.
And that's one of the unique things about the cinema is that most people may not realize that there's an actual pit,
Yes.
like right in front of the screen there. And it's really interesting because you'll go to the cinema and you'll be like, oh, there's a little stage there, and people go up there and talk every now and then. But then when the actual pit is open, you can like peek down in there and you're like, oh wow, I didn't realize there's all this room down there. I mean, it's not like the biggest space, but
Yeah.
by
Exactly.
any means. I mean, we understand that.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting just to kind of peek down in there and just kind of see what they're working with down there.
Yeah. The great thing, though, about the cinema is that even if they didn't have the pit, John would still find a way to do this.
Totally, yeah.
He would still have found a
yeah.
way to do this. You can tell that this is something he's been dying to do for so long, and he finally has the chance. Because even when he will talk about stuff at the Vickers Theater, his theater that he ran in Michigan, and they did live music events constantly. And you could just look at the cinema schedule, and 3 or 4 times a semester there'll be some live music. I'm sure John would do it every week if he
Sure.
could manage it. But yeah.
And then one of the really interesting things that they, because traditionally when you go and see sort of an orchestra, you can sort of acknowledge them and sort of see them. Whereas obviously at the cinema, they're kind of like down in there.
Yeah.
And I don't know was it the Metropolis event?
It's at every
Where they do the
orchestra
camera
event.
thing?
They've got a
I
little
love
Yeah,
webcam.
we did that last year.
That is the
Yeah.
coolest thing because
we're
most
trying
people
to
are.
experiment too with having the orchestra not be completely invisible.
Okay.
I mean
Yeah.
that would be the ideal.
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
because then you have that much more.
You can
even.
really see.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
that is a really
it
cool
has its
idea.
drawbacks, so we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
So
actually
yeah,
try
we've got
to
a
find
little
out about
got a little
that.
webcam down in the pit for those of you who haven't seen it.
You can
And
acknowledge the
after,
fact that
after
there are
the
actual people down
performance,
there.
as you're cheering, the screen changes and you can see the performers down in the pit,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah, John, I can't say enough good things about John Vickers, especially his support for student films. But I
Yes.
think these kind of collaborations, it's really quite unique.
Yeah.
I mean,
He thinks it's unique, and I actually think too.
it probably is. I mean, his
not at
arrival
that
in
level.
the cinema, of course, is the catalyst for this in the first place. So.
Yeah. Great. Well, any final thoughts about the event? Any final things you want to tell the audience before they go to this event?
Well, I'd say come. It's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's a one of a kind
just to be
thing. It
able
only
to-
happens once. You're not going to hear it another time. It's not like you can go rent the DVD from someplace and see
Yeah.
it again. I mean, it's,
Yeah, because even if
it's not
we're
the
gonna
same
make a DVD, it
experience.
won't be the
It
same
won't be the
experience
same as a
because
live
we don't
experience.
have that,
Exactly.
Yeah.
that sense
Exactly.
of liveness. And that's one of the nice things about the cinema is they, there's always these special. It's like Cinema Plus. It's a special treat. So, whether it's a pianist that plays with it or whether it brings in a filmmaker to talk about it, and that makes these performances completely unique.
Yeah.
You have to go there to see it.
Exactly. All right. Well, Double Exposure, March 3rd, this coming Sunday at 6:30 p.m. A unique experience. You're not going to see anything else like this definitely not this semester at the cinema, and probably not again until next year when they do this exact same event again with new films and new composers and probably new musicians as well. So, John, Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us. It's very nice having you on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. We will get out of here, guys. Thank you for listening and watching. I'm Andy.
And I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.